Hello. Today we are talking about my best reads of 2020 for mystery, thriller, horror, suspense, that kind of genre family of books. And it was a good year for this category for me mostly, though I will say, I talked about this a little bit in my romance list. Mystery and romance are two genre families where I know what I like pretty well. Like, I know my tropes. I can find things on the back of books that I'm like, I'm gonna like that. In romance, there is a bounty of books that fall with my preferences available to me. Like, there's just a lot of them. In mystery, thriller, horror, I know what I like, but there's not as much of a supply of it. So it's harder for me to have as many books that I'm like, oh yeah, like it's always harder for me to get the books that I really love in that category. So anyway, I did have many mystery, thriller, horror picks this year though that I really did enjoy. And this was also a year where I finished off reading my all-time favorite author, Agatha Christie's oeuvre. So you will be seeing a lot of her on this list. So with that being said, I should mention best to me means favorite, and of 2020 means books I read in 2020, not published this year. So just caveat there. Anyway, with that being said, let's dive on in with number 10, and that is Partners in Crime by Agatha Christie. So this is a collection of Tommy and Tuppence short stories, and I did not love The Secret Adversary, which is the first in the Tommy and Tuppence series. It was just okay to me. Like, it was fine. Partners in Crime I found to be incredibly charming. It was written in the 20s, and it just has that sort of Jolly Jape adventure type vibe to it. They are interconnected, which I think is really fun. So basically the setup is Tommy is working for kind of the equivalent of the Secret Service, one of the MIs. I don't know which, like MI5, I don't know which ones are which, I'm sorry. He's working for like the Secret Service and he's like kind of like a spy. And they come to him with a proposition, which is to basically take over this detective agency, which is known to have ties to the Russians. So there's a lot of sort of like Red Scare commie stuff in this book. Because they also know that Tuppence has quite the knack for mystery solving as well, they suggest that she can come in to this business with him. So they are running this detective agency under an alias, and there's just a bunch of short stories that are just fun. Some of them are more thrillery, so they're more having to do with the sort of Russian commie subplot thing. And then some of them are just straight up, people off the street coming in, asking them to solve a whodunit for them. So I found this very charming, very fun. Like, this is Christie in her really fun mode, and it just put a smile on my face. And I also love that there's sort of a meta element to these stories because they are assuming the personas of various famous fictional detectives, so like Sherlock Holmes or whoever, some of whom I was familiar with, some of whom were less familiar to me. But very excitingly, at one point they do a Poirot. So in this universe, in the Tommy and Tuppence universe, Poirot is a fictional detective. I don't know. I just enjoyed that sort of like, whoa, what is happening? Anyway, so all that to say, number 10, I definitely thought this was a really fun version of what Christie does. Number 9 is also an Agatha Christie and also Tommy and Tuppence. This is N or M, which is the next book in the series and is a book that is set about 20 years later when Tommy and Tuppence are parents. They are in middle age and Britain is entering World War II. And one of the interesting things about this book is that it is one of the only books that Christie wrote during World War II that directly references what is going on. So like, for instance, in the middle of this book, the Battle of Dunkirk, like the saving of everybody, Dover from the fishermen's boats, like all of that happens. So like, it's a book written in real time where Christie herself doesn't know how World War II is going to end. And that sort of anxiety is projected onto the characters. So I just thought that this had a really nice sort of psychology to the characters added in. It's really fun to see Tommy and Tuppence go from these sort of like carefree, hapless 20-somethings in the 20s to now being parents of two kids who are serving in the war. Like, their son is a soldier, their daughter is in Secret Service kind of thing. Tommy gets recruited by his old bosses to go on an undercover mission to the seaside town to try to uncover these two essentially traitors to the British Crown who are helping out the Germans. And so it's a thriller. It has a mystery mystery. It does that thing that Christie does in some of these thriller books where it's a very effective combination of a spy thriller with a whodunit plot kind of engine in it. And I think she just does those really well. I was very moved by this book, just with all the kind of knowing when this was written in history and sort of all the things surrounding it. I just thought that this was a really fun mystery with some real like underlying heft to it that I personally really enjoyed. Also, I'm just a Christie fangirl, so any kind of book that has something unique about it from her is going to be interesting to me. So that is number 9. Number 8 is The Shadows by Alex North, and I would describe this as a serial killer thriller with paranormal elements to it that I thought that he really effectively incorporated into the story. So basically the setup is, as children, there was this group who had this sort of charismatic, creepy AF little ringleader who was teaching them how to use their dreams to enact real life things on their enemies. And there ends up being a murder, and the kid is thought to be the murderer. The ringleader is thought to be the murderer, but then his paranormalness allows him to escape into the dream world. So it's like this question of is there a ghost? That's kind of like the setup here, is we're trying to find out, is there an actual paranormal element happening or not? And then we're flashing forward in time to the present day with one of the kids, and the serial murderer may be back. And, again, is it a ghost? Is it the actual original kid, or is it just copycats inspired by his sort of legacy? So I'm not always big on the back and forth timeline, but this is an example of where I think it is done really, really well. I think that the creepy elements of this are really effective and genuinely a genuinely creepy kid. Like he icked me out, and I had a couple of moments of audible oh, ooh. It took me by surprise in a few places. And I just thought that this was a really good version of this kind of serial killer thriller. I do like a serial killer thriller, so I'm a sucker for that. But I just thought that this had some nice family elements to it. Yeah, just all around, I thought that this was a great version of what it was. Really fun. And I actually listened to this on audio and thought that the audio was really good. Number 7 is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. I absolutely love Alyssa Cole in romance, and this is her first foray outside of that genre into the thriller space. Now, it says a thriller. It is marketed as a thriller. I'm going to tell you right now, and I've been saying, I think that this is a horror novel, not a thriller. And I think that your expectations for the pacing of this will be much better met if you expect it to be a horror novel and not a thriller, because it doesn't have the boom, 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 suspensey kind of pacing I would expect from a thriller. It has a slow crank up to the action. And once things kick off, and it gets real intense and it's a lot. But it does take a while to get there. So I think that thinking of this as a horror novel will set you up for much better success than thinking of it as a thriller. This has been called a gentrification thriller, and I think that this is basically a book take on the ideas of the movie Get Out, but set in Brooklyn, not in the suburbs, and basically kind of what are the implications of all of these white people moving into this historically Black neighborhood, and could there be something more sinister underlying why that is happening? I think that the character work in this is really lovely. As somebody who's experienced the loss of a parent at a young age, I thought that there's a piece of this of the mother, one of the main character's mothers being sick, and I appreciated all of that. I thought that was handled really well. There's a romantic side plot that I thought was incorporated really nicely into this. Overall, I just think that there's an atmosphere of menace and creepiness that is really effective in this book. I think the thematic content is wonderful, and I also really enjoy, she has a kind of the equivalent of the Nextdoor app, postings from that included in this, and I thought that was really smart and well observed as well. So overall, I think that this is a wonderful first entry into a new genre from Alyssa Cole, who I've literally never read a bad book from Alyssa Cole. She is just I think she's a masterful writer of genre fiction, and if this is your first encounter with her and you're open to romance, I would certainly recommend her other books because they are also very well written. So anyway, number 7, excited to see more from her in this genre in the future. Number 6 is 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. Now, this is, I guess, the second time on this list we're talking about a meta quality to a book, and we will definitely get that with my top pick for this genre. But I absolutely love this book as a meta commentary on the mystery genre itself. That is something that I tend to really enjoy in mystery books, where there's an awareness on the part of the characters of the conventional beats of a whodunit. This one, the whole premise of this is that this bookstore owner had this old blog post about 8 perfect murders in these 8 mystery thriller books, and somebody, a serial killer, possibly, they can't quite tell if it's actually a serial killer, but in theory, maybe there's a serial killer who is using that list to serial kill people. Again, I really like a serial killer book, so that works for me. And just the overall discussions of these different books, what makes them a perfect murder, just that discussion of the whodunit genre in sort of a meta-textual way was something that I really enjoyed. But I do want to give a caveat, and I put the list of books you need to watch out for in my Goodreads review, so I'll refer you to there. This spoils the plot of a good dozen classic mysteries. So if you have not read those mysteries and you have any intention of reading them, I would do a little research, because there's also 3 great Christies that get spoiled in this. And Then There Were None, Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and I think the ABC murders. All 3 of them have their twists spoiled by this book. So definitely do some research to make sure you're not going to accidentally get spoiled before you read this, because there's some great books that are mentioned in here. But I just really enjoyed this. I thought this was fun and smart, and it does a thing where you as the reader know where it's going if you've read a lot of mystery, and the book tells you that it knows that you know where it's going. So some people won't like that because it's not surprising enough. We'll get to that later in this list. But for me, I enjoy that as a big reader of this genre. It's hard to surprise me, and I enjoy it when a book acknowledges that and just rolls with it. So anyway, I really like this one, and I thought that it was just a lot of fun. Number 5 is The Pale Horse by Agatha Christie, and there was a big adaptation of this at the end of last year in the UK, and then it came out in the US at the beginning of this year. And I think the adaptation is interesting. I prefer the book, and the adaptation goes in a very different direction than the book. So I will just say that. But this book was the rare Agatha Christie where she fooled me, because I am pretty good at this point. I've read all of her books at this point, and I'm good at kind of figuring out who is likely to have done it. So it's rare for me to have I didn't see that coming. And she did that because she fooled me as to what kind of Agatha Christie I was reading. And I just loved that. I loved thinking I was going down one path and it ended up being another. The setup for this is basically there's this inn called the Pale Horse that ostensibly may have some ties to the occult that people are using to kill off people in their lives. And our main characters are trying to figure out if that's actually true, what's really going on, are there shady things happening in this little town. So it's a Christie with insinuations of paranormal activity. It's always fun. And yeah, anyway, like I said, this one had to be this high up just because it's so rare for her to pull the wool over my eyes of what direction she's going from her kind of, bag of typical plot she uses. So I was just delighted to be a little bit surprised by that. Number 4 is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is a horror novel that is basically, I think part of why I love this so much is that this is a horror novel set in the white suburban South of the 90s, which is where I grew up. And so I recognize the characters in this like no other. Sort of the nouveau riche white flight of that era. That's my background. So the racial commentary that he is making with this horror novel, I think is so incisive and smart and real. I just love, this is using a vampire, the metaphor here is vampirism and essentially the racial tensions of the American South in the 90s. This vampire is preying on different people in this community based on their own fragility and sort of the social order. Our protagonists are kind of basically nice white ladies who are in this book club together where they read all these kind of Anne Rule true crime books. And this vampire starts insinuating his way into their lives and into their husbands' businesses. One of them kind of is seeing what is happening, and it's sort of about her attempt to try to undermine him. And again, I just thought that this was its thematic and commentary elements I just thought were really, really smart, really well done. There's a lot of sort of graphic horror elements to this in terms of like ick factors, so know that. And also definitely big content warnings on child predation, sexual assault, so just know that about this book as well. But this has some dark humor to it, and I just thought this was a page turner in a way that not all books of its kind are. I couldn't put this down. Like, I read this in one day because I was just sucked in by it. So really enjoyed his writing, and I will definitely seek out more from him in the future. I also interviewed him for a BookCon panel, so I will link to that video somewhere. It's still up on my channel, and he was very charming to talk to. So all in all, really enjoyed this. Number 4. Number 3 is a controversial pick because this is my first book that I've read from a very popular author, and I think that this may be her least popular book because people like her for thriller, and this is really more of a whodunit, and that is One by One by Ruth Ware. So this is the first time I've ever read something from Ruth Ware, and I really enjoyed this as a very, in my mind, one of the most effective versions of a contemporary isolated close circle mystery that I've ever read. Now, if you come to this book expecting to have a thrill, like a thriller, I think you will be disappointed. And if you are somebody who more than anything in mystery thriller values being completely surprised, again, I don't know that this is something you'll love because I don't know that this was like super hard to figure out. But that to me is not the joy of a mystery. The joy is seeing how authors follow these plot types and use these character types in ways that I enjoy. Like, if they can do that effectively, I don't need to be completely shocked by how things unfold because realistically, you kind of know. I don't know. Sorry. Maybe this is a whole other topic that I can talk about at a separate time, but that's just not something that I value in my mystery reading. So yeah, I think if she was going to make this a little more surprising, probably one more point of view in this would have been helpful. But I think that this is a really good version of what it is, which is a bunch of people who know each other get isolated together. Somebody dies. You got to figure out who done it because more people are dying. I love that plot, and this delivers that plot really well. The setup for this one is that it is a bunch of people who work together. They are on a corporate retreat in the Alps, and they all have some monetary motives where it would be beneficial possibly to off one or more of the people who are there, and they get snowed in, there's an avalanche, and like chaos ensues. So I just thought this was a good version of what it was, like one of the best versions of this trope, to be honest, of a contemporary writer that I've read, and it makes me very excited to try more from Ruth Ware. So for me, this is my number 3 pick of the year. I feel like that's kind of controversial, so do with that what you will. Number 2 is my last Christie on this list, and that is The Man in the Brown Suit from her. And this is one of her sort of political thrillers. It does have a murder mystery element in there, but it's really more of a political thriller. And tonally, this book just worked for me. It is her in the 20s writing her sort of light, fun thriller things that she did in this era, and just sort of, there's a lot of kind of world hopping or like world tripping elements, like we're going from England to South Africa on a cruise, and we're trying to solve some international intrigue along the way. I do want to give warnings for a lot of its time elements in this book in terms of the attitudes towards colonialism and the sort of implied racism that goes along with that. So I do just want to make people aware of that before they pick it up. For me, it didn't ruin my enjoyment of the book because I feel like it's contextualized in its time. This was written in the 20s, but just something to know. And yeah, this is I really love the main character of this one. It's one of her sort of bright young things, and I think it's a great version of her sort of plucky female protagonist she does. And this is probably my favorite of her thriller type books of this ilk. So I definitely had to put it very high up on the list for that reason. Okay, and then we get to my number 1 choice, which is gonna be very controversial because I think I am in the minority of people who just really love this book and thought it was interesting and doing cool things. I want to mention off the bat, people have problems with this book because they think, well, 2 things. One, some people don't enjoy the meta quality of this book, which is something I love. We've already talked about that on this list. So if you don't like that in your mystery, where when I say meta, it's a mystery that is commenting on its own genre. So it has a self-awareness in the text of reader expectations about how mysteries work. So if you don't like that, you won't like this book. And then this book calls its shots in several places, and and then does and doesn't deliver on it. And so if you are looking for something that is wholly unpredictable, or you want an ending, I don't even know, I can't really get into specifics without giving it away, but I think some people don't like the ending of this because of some of the meta textual elements to it. So with all that being said, I love this book, and that is The Eighth Detective by Alex Pavesi. This book kind of grew on me as I was reading it because it basically reads like a set of interconnected short stories. The framing device for this is this woman has gone to this Greek isle to meet with this reclusive author who wrote this collection of short stories in the 1930s and 40s. It's like 20 or 30 years later, and her publishing house wants to put out like a anniversary edition of these sort of classic short stories or whatever. So she's going to interview this author about his process. So we're getting each of the 7 short stories as the book unfolds, and then we have interstitials with the woman who's there to interview the author and like their dynamics. So, you know, at first I was like, okay, this is interesting. And they read, each of these short stories reads very much like a classic whodunit. The author of those short stories has this theory about like using mathematical equations to set up the variables to a mystery novel. So like you get a lot of discussion about sort of the theory of how mystery plots work and like the different character types in them. And then this just has a bunch of different really classic whodunit setups. There's a locked room mystery. This has one of my favorite isolated closed circle mysteries I've ever read. What like we were talking about earlier, where everybody's trapped together, somebody dies, you got to figure out who done it. This has one of my favorite takes on that trope I've ever seen. I love that short story. And then I loved how I was having questions about the stories as we were going, and then as the story builds on itself in the framing device, we get more and more insights that validate and then subvert some of those questions that a reader who has read a lot of mystery is likely to have as the book goes along. So that sort of engagement of Alex Pavesi, the actual author, and me reading about these short stories written by this fake author and his fake detective, like that whole dynamic, I love. Like I love that kind of dance between me, the actual reader, and the actual author in a meta way in his text. So like I was way into this. I really enjoyed it. It is not going to be a book for everyone, but it's the most interesting mystery I read this year by far. And when I was looking through my list, I was like, yeah, I feel like I have to put this at the top because this was the most engaging in a mystery thriller horror kind of realm that I read this year. Like this really, I found this really intellectually engaging, and it also gave me some of just the pure pleasure-idness of a book in the genre that I enjoy. So for me, The Eighth Detective by Alex Pavesi is my top pick for mystery thriller horror for this year. And with that, those were my best of favorites of 2020 reading in this family of genres. And definitely let me know if you've read any of these, what you think in the comments below, or maybe what your favorite book in mystery thriller was this year. And yeah, I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon.